when the hurt and the anger doesn't have anywhere to go, folks will actually turn on one another. And in the Indigenous community, in the poverty community where there's some woundedness, we call that lateral violence. So we're actually with the next generation of young people, young men, young women, we're flipping that narrative, and we're talking about lateral empathy, lateral kindness, uh, all of us looking after each other, bringing back the sense of village, the sense of community.
Hello, it's Henry McKay here with the Return of the Buffalo podcast. Nibawe Makade Makwa Deshnakas Maingandodam. And we're sitting here today with Mitch Bourbonniere, a person that I really hold a special place in my heart for. He's a real inspiration. I'm very blessed to be able to work with a person like that. And he's one of the three people that really made a huge impact on my life. And if it wasn't for Mitch, I don't know if I would have been able to do the work that I'm doing today. He's opened many doors for many people, myself included. And he's just an all-around beautiful person.
Yes. And bonjour, everybody. Maingan inene Indigenous. It's Marcus Peter Rumpel here, and happy to be here with Mitch. Happy to be here with Henry. Happy to be on the Return of the Buffalo podcast. You can find us at most places that host podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. Please, if you like what's going on here, subscribe to our podcast and rate us. Even if you don't listen to us on a platform where you can rate us, if you can go and find one and rate us there anyway, it helps other folks who are into similar kinds of podcasts and stories connect with this one, and kind of bump us into view for on the very busy world of the internet. And if you like what we're doing here and you want to support the Sandy Soto Spiritual Center, please check it out at sandysoto.ca. There's various ways that you can contribute there, and you can just have a look and find whatever method of supporting the center works for you. Super excited to talk to Mitch, and I don't think I have anything further. Henry, is there anything else that I'm forgetting here? Okay, then without further ado, we give you Mitch Bourbonniere. Awesome guy.
So we're here today with Mitch Bourbonniere, a person that I really hold high. I have great respect and a lot of love for this person, and he's very well known within the community, the helping community in Winnipeg and around Manitoba as well. I'm very excited to have him on the podcast. Thank you for joining us here today, Mitch.
Oh, thank you, Henry, and thank you for the kind words. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So we're doing this podcast to kind of get a little bit more about yourself and your story out there. And one of the questions that I would have is that in your life, what are some of the experiences and who are some of the people who formed you into this dynamic and passionate community leader and the advocate you are today?
Well, I'll start with my parents. So when I was a little guy, my dad was very community oriented, and we lived in a little Métis parish in Winnipeg called Saint Emile. And he would drive around on Saturdays in his old jalopy truck, and I'd tag along. I was 7 or 8 years old, and he'd pick up donations of furniture all around Winnipeg and bring that to the families in our little community that needed those things. And also he he ran a little painting company, and it was the men that worked for him. This was in the 1960s. The men that worked with him had all been World War II veterans in the 1940s, and so they were probably in their 40s, and they were all single men that today we would diagnose them with post-traumatic stress, and back then they were called like shell-shocked. And these men lived in rooming houses, and my dad used to take me visiting, and we would visit these beautiful men in their rooming houses, and I just remember these guys just lighting up that my dad and I would go and visit them. Like, it just made them feel so good and so important and special, right? And those were my dad's guys, those were the guys he looked after. So those two things had a huge impact on me, like just the practicality and the basic needs of just driving around and getting what people needed physically, but then those visits to the folks that would really appreciate it really resonated with me, and that's kind of what I do today. I do a lot of both those things.
It's so funny, Mitch. Like, I could just, like, when I first got to know you, you did something that you called men's group at MATC, and it's like I just hear the blueprint of men's group in your dad's story, because it was you driving around Winnipeg in your old jalopy van, with a van full of guys, and I remember us picking up furniture at someone was getting rid of something, and some refugee family newly arrived in Winnipeg needed something, and we would move furniture, and we would pick up recycling, and then we'd all pile into Wannabes for brunch together and have the kind of visit that I imagine your dad had with those guys. Yeah, did your dad have any kind of did he have like a formal title or role, or that's just who he was?
It's just who he was. My mom, it was a Catholic school and church called St. Emile. That was our little parish. And my mom was a teacher in the school, and my dad, he just did everything for that little community. He got a gymnasium built for the school, and he did fundraising, and he worked, his little painting company, but his true passion was building community.
Yeah, community in the sense of actually helping and being with each other, as opposed to the way our society works, as we're so individualistic, and it's so refreshing to see the work that you do and the work that you teach others. When I see you doing that work, it makes me and then others just kind of want to carry that on as well.
Yeah, and you guys have really carried it on. I couldn't be more proud. People say, well, I've built this big community of OPK and action therapy and some of the stuff we do in the community, but really I've just kind of done my thing, and it's been all these wonderful men and women who've kind of jumped on with me, and they're doing it. And so, for the next generation, for our youth and for our families and for some of our vulnerable folks out there. So I have a great sense of pride, but I really haven't done anything but be myself and do my thing, and that's still my favorite thing to do, is just drive around and be helpful.
Yeah.
Well, and I really have you to thank for my friendship and work with Henry, because I approached you when we were getting Return of the Buffalo going, and I said I need some Indigenous guys as on this team, and who can you recommend? And you gave me. There were a couple other guys that didn't end up taking the positions, but you talked about Henry as one of the finest young Indigenous guys, and so I called him up, and I'm just so glad I did.
Yeah, in fact, he was the first guy I thought of, because I got a lot of loyalty to Henry, because I think everything I've done is I look back, and Henry was a child in care. Henry stayed with an elder we both share, Luke Arquette. You know, he went on.
Right.
He went on to be one of the first OPK participants, and then years later he would approach me, and I'll never forget. We met at A&W.
Yep.
And I'll never forget that moment, because ever since then it's just been a gift to have Henry in my life, and how he's taken off and done the work he's done with his family. And not a more lovable guy and a more lovable family you'll find either. So, and yeah, you're right, Marcus. I just have this knack of bringing good people together. It just works out. I just let them get to know each other. Like, I'll just bring someone to someone else, and I'll say, hey, here's so and so, and here's so and so, and then I'll get back on my way. Right. And then weeks later, months later, a year later, I find out they've done this beautiful work together. And so the story of Marcus and Henry is very common in my life.
Yeah. I've seen you do that. I've seen you do that in meetings. You'll introduce someone and you hold their hand and you'll be like, this is a good person. I love this person. And then someone connects with that person, and then that blessing that you have it was huge for me to have to know that Henry had that connection with you, Mitch. Like, it was like, okay, this is gonna work. Like, and it's just interesting it's almost like a different kind of accreditation or something. Like, it makes me think about like your action therapy network and how you kind of maybe talk a little bit about like what action therapy is and the way you kind of you sort of deputized a whole network of leaders and helpers there in a way that's kind of like it's connected to, but it's like also sort of adjacent to the sort of standard, like you have to have a social work degree to be a helper in the community kind of way of connecting with community.
Yeah, I'll definitely comment on that. And in fact, you alluded to it, Marcus, when you talked about some of the work we did in the 1990s at MATC, the Manitoba Adolescent Treatment Center. Mm-hmm. And I actually went on a road trip yesterday with Rob Diamond-Burchuk to Portage la Prairie to visit some of our youth.
Is he still at MATC?
Yes, he is.
Okay, yeah, that's where you and I met.
That's right. And I actually look back on those days in the early, mid, even late 90s as really the genesis of action therapy. And Rob and I were kind of like the original guys doing this, and we didn't even know we were onto something. But we took kids out into the community to be helpers, to give back, to do community service, and So what it is we make ourselves available to be helpful in the community. So whether it's shoveling snow for elders in the winter, whether it's mowing lawns for them in the summer, whether it's delivering hampers to folks who need it, whether it's helping someone move, helping someone get furniture, it's just random acts of kindness. We just avail ourselves to be helpful, and we've actually move that into the Indigenous world. And Henry's really good at this. It's chopping wood. It's getting wood for the elders. It's harvesting grandfather and grandmother stones for medicine people and the folks that run our ceremonies and our lodges. So it's actually really dovetailed very nicely into the Indigenous world. But the genesis, the original action therapy, we weren't calling it that back then. But Rob and I were talking about this yesterday. We look back, really almost 30 years ago, we were doing this stuff. And then I moved on from MATC in 2003 to the school division, the Louis Riel School Division. And then for the next several years, I kind of did action therapy in the school division. I would take, the most active, high-flying kids that had lots of trouble in the classroom, and I'd take them out into the community, and we would do community service. And man, some of them just ended up feeling so good about themselves that they could go back into the classroom, and they could, cooperate and do what they needed to do to get their education. So, and then I kind of went from there to working in the justice world. I got a contract working with the highest level gang members in the youth custody system. The program was called Spotlight at the time, and then I did action therapy there. And a lot of young people turn their lives around by feeling productive, by gaining skills, by learning communication, social skills, dealing with the customer, conflict resolution when we're all trying to work, teamwork, like every possible independent living and social skill is addressed when you are doing community work. And then it just kind of became official. Like Child and Family Services started asking us to work with their youth, their Indigenous youth, and do that Indigenous version of action therapy, which is a blend of community work, but also land-based stuff, positive activism, volunteerism, ceremony, all of that we are doing.
It's very, very important work. Like the thing that I found while doing action therapy is when it really gets down to it, a lot of these youth, they don't have like a positive outlet. So I would be like,
right.
If you're having a tough day, give me a call, even if it's just like for half an hour to an hour. We're going out driving. We'll find something to do and we'll talk. Growing up in the system, you really put up these barriers, these barriers, so that you don't want to be kind of like hurt or anything, and it's kind of hard to open up to people, and building that relationship with the youth where they can open up and talk about like their feelings and their emotions and all that, while learning all this other stuff like lateral empathy is a big thing, and it would be nice for you to like kind of like describe that philosophy of lateral empathy if you can, Mitch.
Absolutely. So a mentor of Henry and of mine from years ago, Larry Morissette. So I've mentioned Luke Arquette. He was very significant for both Henry and I, but so was Larry. So Larry headed up a program called OPK, Ogijita Pimatsuan Kinamatwan. And so Larry also contributed to a lot of literature around colonialism, the effects of assimilation, the effects of oppression. And he was a very, very intelligent man. He was a First Nation and Métis man that actually went through the University of Manitoba social work school in the 1970s. But he was also very, very community minded. But he, in one of his books that he co-wrote, Indians Wear Red, he talked about the idea of what happens to an oppressed group when the hurt and the anger doesn't have anywhere to go. Folks will actually turn on one another, and in the Indigenous community, in the poverty community where there's some woundedness, we call that lateral violence. And that's the last place that people need to be hurting each other, but it happens. And in its most dramatic forms, you can think of things like domestic violence, you can think of things such as child abuse and all of those things, but and self-inflicted stuff, drugs, alcohol, addiction, all that comes from trauma. And people can become their own worst enemy, and they can turn on each other, and that's what happens in some of our communities, and we call that lateral violence. So we're actually with the next generation of young people, young men, young women, we're flipping that narrative, and we're talking about lateral empathy, lateral kindness, all of us looking after each other, bringing back the sense of village, the sense of community. So, when we get a request to help someone in the community, that person in the community is somewhat vulnerable. It could be a single mom, it could be an elder, it could be, a youth that has no one else, and we'll show up and get them furniture and do whatever we need for those folks. But who's doing that work are also other folks that are vulnerable, the youth we work with. And when you think of people who donate their household goods, their furniture, all the donations that we receive word of mouth, those folks feel good. It's good medicine for them to be contributing. They don't know how to contribute. So one way they can contribute is to do these donations. So that's a win. And then, of course, the youth who actually pull off all the work, they end up with skills, they end up feeling better about themselves, they're contributing. And then, of course, the people who receive, that goodwill feel loved and cared for. So it's a complete wraparound community healing type of initiative.
Mm. It's in giving that you receive.
Yes, totally.
Somebody said that once, I think.
Yeah. and really the notion of you can help yourself by helping others. It's medicine.
It is
and really
medicine.
That's my story.
Yeah.
I ended up at Rossbrook House in 1979 as a 16-year-old, and I began to volunteer and spend time with the youth, and it was medicine for me. I had like all of us, we've all had some trauma, and I had my fair share as a little guy, and I didn't know what to do with my hurt. I didn't know what to do with my anger. But when I ended up, when Creator opened the door for me to be a helper, that became medicine for me. And I've never looked back ever since.
Yeah, helping really is like, it really is medicine. It's healing, like I said, getting back to like just the basics, helping others. That's just in our human nature, and Western civilization, colonization, oppression, poverty has taken that all away from most of us, not just Indigenous groups, but groups all over the world. And that really is medicine for the spirit or the soul, or whatever you want to call it, right? But that's very important. And I've seen through the few years of working with Mitch that I've seen the transition from some of the youth where they're getting that medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Mitch, you kind of alluded a little bit to the transition from like going out doing these things in the community to like the Indigenous based stuff, and a big part of that, and a big part of the things that the work that some of us do as action therapists is land based healing. So like what comes to mind when you think about like that land based healing?
Well, there's something spiritual. Well, obviously, something spiritual about the earth itself. It's healing for me. Like I could chop wood all day long, just to be out there, just to, to be the sights, the smells, the sensations of being in the bush is unbelievable. It's, I can be out there alone or I can be out there with a group. It doesn't matter. It just feels good to be outside the city and on the land. And whether it's clearing land, getting ready for a ceremony, whether it's building a Sundance arbor or a sweat lodge, whether it's gathering stones, chopping wood, looking after the fire, there's just something when you're working, when you're moving, when your hands are touching the earth, and like it's just unbelievable. And like ultimately we have youth with trauma, and ultimately they do need to talk it out. Right? Mm-hmm. But for a young person to sit in an office and be vulnerable to someone that they don't quite know on a 1 hour, once a week basis does not work. But I'll tell you, we have profound clinical conversations and therapeutic discussions with our young people. But it might be at a fire, it might be clearing bush. It might be just in the vehicle getting to wherever we're getting. It might be sharing a meal. It might be doing volunteerism or positive activism or ceremony or ice fishing or anything. Like all the things we do are either land-based or positive activism or volunteerism or ceremony. And there's lots of overlap in those four worlds as well.
Yes, there is.
I have a question about like you make this, like it's so compelling, the sense of village, the sense of lateral empathy, the sense of like getting back to the earth and building a community of helpers helping each other. And it makes me think like I think I want to ask you a question, Mitch, like why do you think there isn't more of this way of, like, it's a kind of, to me it's a sort of, there's something basically sort of decolonized about this way of villaging and seeking healing in the kind of relational, on ground, on the road kind of way of being that you embody. And I wonder if you think about like why are so many of us stuck in our offices, and why is that like the main way that gets funded, that gets supported, that gets accredited?
I think all of us, all nations, all around the world have been colonized for such a long time that it starts to get into the DNA.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I just don't think folks can wrap their heads around how, like I've had it, not so much in recent years, but I got to tell you, if I've been hurt. I've been hurt, by criticism, by almost mockery from
Right.
other
Yeah.
professionals,
Yeah.
where and if you think back, Marcus, to the 90s when we were doing what we were doing,
Mm.
there was a lot of pushback, there was a lot of negativity, there was a lot of folks who didn't think we were professional,
Yeah.
didn't think what we were doing was therapeutic, and that.
I can remember a certain psychiatrist who we won't name, whose philosophy was basically that like you and me and the other staff were basically there to sort of be friends with the young people while they worked the medications out, and that was the real that was the real deal, and the rest of us were like, I don't know, camp counselors or something as far as he was concerned.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
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 That's that way of thinking that's really in the structures of society, education and all that, even me too, like I struggled, I always like, the reason why I do this work is I found it in ceremony, and I really do enjoy it, and it's healing and it's helping. But the thing though is I found that it's tough to get your foot in any door really, unless you have some sort of like certificate or something, or a degree attached to your name.
Yeah, there's a term called credentialism,
Yes.
and that is something that actually is, as time goes on, you actually need more and more and more credentials, and
Mm-hmm.
and for a lot of good people that are gifted, that can be a challenge sometimes. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
yeah,
And I think that further oppresses our people. The thing that I love about action therapy is that you have this beautiful group of people that come with such profound lived experience. People that just been through it, going through it, or still working at it. When that's something that the youth they benefit from, and it's really hard to quantify something like that.
yeah, and I don't think everybody can do it, and I think maybe that's the other problem, and I think that's why there's some resistance in doing what we do, because it takes a pretty special person just to be real, and just to get out there and take chances and move and create experiences, like, and there's also a spiritual feeling between like the mentors and the youth we work with.
Yeah.
We adopt one another, we become family, we become like, all the action therapists are brothers and sisters, and these are our nephews and nieces, and they all become cousins to one another.
Yes.
And it's real. We might get introduced to a youth formally through an agency, and there's a contract and all of that, but man, that goes to the wayside once the relationship gets going, because even after the expiration of that formal work and those contracts, we are still involved in the lives of these young people. It's a kinship model. Once you've adopted someone, then we're all in each other's lives for forever in
Yeah.
some ways. So
Like speaking to that, like that kinship and that using family terms like that, like I'm curious, like love has to be like really central to that, hey?
yeah,
Like that's gotta
like
be, yeah.
I feel love for these young people.
Yes.
I feel love for my fellow action therapists. We are family, and we've seen, Henry and we've seen it work. We've seen very angry, very hurt folks like just triumph, just emerge, and come out of their shells and find their true selves.
So like this is one thing I find so compelling and so fascinating about your approach. And I have a question I've been wanting to ask you, Mitch, which has to do about like uh, love and boundaries. And like I'm just finishing up my first practicum in the marriage and family therapy program at the U of W, and I think my clinical supervisor would get really squirmy if I started talking in terms of like loving my clients, um, and claiming them as family. Um, in the tradition that I'm being educated in, there's much more of a sense of like, that like you need to keep that clear boundary between yourself and the client, and not get too enmeshed. And I think like the caution there is like there are ways in which relationships can get messy, and like the power imbalance between someone who's paid to be in a relationship and someone who's not, like, can get weird. And so, like, in your case, I think like there's a sense, I have a sense about you that your boundaries are pretty good. And like like when I hear you, I don't get a creepy feeling when I hear you talking about love in that kind of work. But I hear like other voices in the back of my head from like other people who've been part of my education who are like, well, how do you do the boundaries in that kind of a work? What do you get challenged in that way, and what do you say to that?
In the early years, I did. Like, I'll give you an example. So we have two youth jails in Manitoba, one in Winnipeg, one in Portage la Prairie, Manitoba Youth Center and Agassiz Youth Center. And so we have incarcerated youth. They're doing jail time. And, way back when, I've been doing this for 35 years, and I've been visiting those jails for 35 years. And way back when, in the beginning, I would visit youth, and all the visitations were done kind of publicly in a kind of a common area where staff was all about, um, which was okay because we could still, kind of hunker down and have a private conversation. Many conversations going on at once because different folks visited at different times. But as you visit someone for 2 years, and they pour their heart out, and they make themselves
Mm-hmm.
vulnerable, and they honor you by sharing their story. You learn to love them,
Mm-hmm.
and I got to tell you, the Inuit have 40 different names for snow. So maybe we need 40 different names for love.
That's
Like, there's
interesting.
all kinds of different love. But and there's another thing I want to comment on while I'm thinking about it, and that's toxic
Mm-hmm.
masculinity. So men have been taught to not say I love you, not feel your
Mm.
emotions, not ask for
Mm.
help, and not to
Mm.
cry,
Yep.
right? We do all of those things, and we do it with each other, and we do it with these young people. If I didn't love this young person in a good way, if it wasn't
Mm.
real, and I was telling them I love them, that would be creepy. That is creepy.
Mm-hmm.
But when it's real, and you can't help but even say it, and so here, back in the day, I'd have like a high level gang
Mm.
member who's 16, 17, 18 years old, who's had horrible trauma done to them, and has gone on to do trauma to others. And after 2 years of visiting them, we can stand up after our little visit in the common area, and that young man says, I love you,
Mm.
Mitch. And I say to him, love you too, my boy.
Mm.
And back in the day, like, the staff were freaking out, like, what? They couldn't understand it. And then we'd give each other a hug,
Yeah.
right? But man, what a turnaround in all these years, because I walk into those institutions now, and everybody knows that that's okay to do.
Yeah, it is.
Like, we've actually changed that culture in youth prisons.
Mm. Well, and when you think about the attachment science, like what we know about attachment relationships and co-regulation that comes in relationships where there's that bond, and that doesn't happen if there isn't that bond, like what it makes perfect sense, but there's a huge tradition of kind of suspicion of uh, that that closeness in a therapeutic relationship.
Well, and you do have to be careful, and I am careful. And when you talk about my boundaries, like I'm a very expressive, very emotional. I'm very, extroverted. I'm all out there, but it doesn't mean you're not careful,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, like, I'm not hugging someone in a private room.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're in a public area, and two men stand up and give each other a hug. That's okay.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that.
Two men say, "Love you, Mitch. Love you, my boy," in a public area. That's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, there's a place, a time and place for everything.
I really appreciate you saying that, like that you do think about the boundary stuff, because I think that's it's not that you're not thinking about it.
Well, I must be thinking about it because in 35 years, I've had zero confusion, zero problems, zero
Mm.
allegations, zero
Mm.
anything negative about how I do
Mm.
my work.
Mitch, you said something about like decolonization a little earlier. So, what is your role? What do you think your role like, or what do you think needs to happen to decolonize like the child welfare system? We're kind of like action therapy is kind of doing that on the outside of the system, but do you think like something like that can actually happen within a system as the child welfare system?
I don't know, the way it's structured. Like, this is what I'll say to begin with.
Mm,
We certainly need agencies and folks that are tasked with absolutely protecting them from physical abuse, sexual abuse, from all the harms that can come to a child. So we do need protective services. There are times when children need to be
Mm-hmm.
protected.
yeah.
Now, maybe we separate that from healing work
Okay.
and from raising children, because in some ways CFS has become a system that raises children while they aren't able to do
Mm-hmm.
that,
No.
uh, in a micro way that's what the child actually needs. Group homes and shelters and emergency placements. Those aren't homes. That's not a kinship
Mm.
model.
No.
So maybe we need to maybe deconstruct the CFS system. Absolutely, to the core of the system, have a function that really dedicates itself to protection and to safety. But in terms of, you know, um, uh, kinship placements and adoption, and when I say adoption, I mean that in an Indigenous way, in terms of bringing a child into a home where he's going to feel that's my home, this is my family, this is what I need,
Mm-hmm.
right? Maybe that's what we need to look at more.
Mm.
Yeah, a more humanistic approach, and I think that really does need to happen. Um, and I agree. Like there may be some like extreme cases out there where protection is like a must and be, the focus of the plan moving forward. But like that kinship model is severely lacking, and then also like the indigenous ways of being. Spirituality is also left out. Love is left out. Being in the system. That's the most lonely feeling you can have of feeling unloved, and it's just beautiful that there's human beings out there working with these youth that are actually authentically really being real with them and showing them love.
I'll tell you two little mini stories that will absolutely address what you just said, Henry.
Mm.
One story of a young lady, a young woman that I talked to from the north, uh, was apprehended. She was put on an airplane and she was flown out of her community.
Mm-hmm.
And she said the worst, and she understands that there were issues back home, and she understands that her parents are wounded and need help.
Yeah.
She understands that. But what she said really hit my heart. She said, there's not a more hurting feeling than being in an airplane and watching your community get smaller and smaller and smaller as they fly you away. The next little mini story I'll tell you are some of the young men that there's a bit of a continuum in terms of luck of the draw, how some youth do in care and others do. So, you know, like being in care is not natural and it's not optimal. But hopefully, if you are in care, you find a loving long-term placement. That's certainly not the case for everybody.
No.
So for those that don't find that more long-term, loving, safe family feel, right? They're shunted from place to place to place. They're in shelters. They're in emergency places. They're in group homes. And again, this hit my heart, Mitch. I'm being cared for by people who don't even know me. I'm being cared for by people who don't love me. And I cry myself to sleep every night. And the loneliness is aching.
Yeah.
It's profound.
Yeah. Really shakes you to the core.
Yeah. Protection issues are very real, but we don't talk honestly enough about the trauma of apprehensions, and we don't talk honestly enough about the way passing a kid from one person to the next is just a recipe for attachment disorders. And I feel like there's a reckoning that is almost parallel to like the reckoning of the residential school system, where we take a look at a whole system that is, been designed, with this kind of like, we know best and we'll take over here and we'll take kids out of their homes. And there needs to be an honest conversation about, the way, even with the best of intentions, you can pave the road to certain kinds of hell. And I really appreciate the sensitivity and the honesty with which you talk about that, Mitch.
I just don't think that we're not good enough yet at supporting the original families that these kids come from.
Yeah.
And I think, yes, there are times when, they have to be separated because there's so much woundedness. There may be harm in the home. We need to separate the family and the child. We do, for safety reasons. But there are a whole bunch of families that are aching to have their children back. There are a whole bunch of kids that, no matter how tough it was, that's still my parent. That's still my parent. And I will walk in minus 45 from Steinbach to Winnipeg, from my foster home to see my mom in the inner city of Winnipeg. I will do that. And they do, right? And so I just don't think we do enough support of the actual families. If we could offer the families as much resources as we do funding high level group homes, because sometimes poverty causes a lot of that stress. It's stressful to live in poverty, right?
Oh yeah.
And sometimes that's where a lot of hurt and anger and stress comes from, is from poverty. And to take a fraction, and I'll say it, it's money. To take a fraction of the money that we pour into some really high-level group homes and give a fraction of that back to the original family so that they can have, some reduced stress around food, around living conditions, around, safe, affordable housing. Man, that would, that would do wonders.
Yeah, it really would. There's probably just like a very large number out there of families that just need that just a little bit of monetary support, but also like support with like support workers or and
family support workers,
Mhm.
navigators,
and that's the thing.
Advocates.
The thing that I found too with I don't know, like a lot of people know yet, but about this, but like action therapy is actually kind of transitioning into like working with families more now too, as preventative measures.
Prevention services.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, and that's a whole different dynamic, and it's beautiful work. It's just like just to see the way that extra support can benefit a family.
Yeah, there's two examples of folks that are seeing the benefit of action therapy type of support, and that is Jordan's principal and also the Southeast Child Family Services Agency, who are now retaining our support and our services to keep kids in their original homes. Right, and we do that through Jordan's principle, and we're doing that at Southeast rather than just reacting to kids that have been apprehended and removed. Yeah,
and somehow they're finding a way within the. I know budgets are very tight in CFS systems, but somehow they're finding a way to rerouting some of their resources to that kind of support. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, and that's I find that's actually a lot of the focus too. Not a lot of people kind of like, it's not in the forefront, but it's always there. But and you spoke about that as well. The importance of healing and working on the things that we may be carrying inside, and a lot of that does come from trauma and childhood experiences, and then that's the center really of like the work that I've been doing. I really transitioned into to focusing on that that healing journey and walking alongside these people on that journey. And, I think that I don't think there's like too much of a focus on that, and I think that healing is really connected to spirituality.
I mean, for me, I think that's one of the reasons why I kind of came. I kind of retired from the therapy game for a while, and I came out here to Plowshares Community Farm, where I live on the land with some people, where Henry now has a family lodge, and I kind of came out of retirement significantly because there was an opportunity at San Soto Spiritual Center to do healing work with families where there would be a place for spirit and spirituality, and I think for me I really, it's hard for me to imagine doing that kind of work without access to that. But this is sort of a similar question to the question I had about love, like love and boundaries. Like I think we still have this hangover from European colonial spirituality, where church and state kind of married each other and became this powerhouse that wielded a really really colonial and oppressive kind of influence in the name of good works, quote unquote. And I think there's been, like, the West is kind of, it's tried to maybe like clean things up by just putting spirituality in a box on Sunday morning somewhere, and for Indigenous people they're just like, well, that's just, we're not going to put it in a box. But I do like when we think about involving spirituality in healing work, in sort of in a commons that we share with people that come from different kinds of spiritual traditions. I just wonder, like, even inside yourself, you have this relationship to Catholicism, you have a relationship to Indigenous spirituality, and like, I'm curious, like, Mitch, how you kind of understand how to involve spirituality and healing work in a way that kind of doesn't get sucked into those old fights about one religion versus another.
I think the best word I can use, Marcus, is the word faith. So faith totally sustains me. trust. I trust, my creator, our creator. I trust and have faith, that I'm going to be looked after. We're all going to be looked after, and that, we all need to do the right thing and work hard. And that's what's, there's a lot of stress and there's a lot of heartache in the work that we do. And a question I get asked a lot is like, how do you not burn out? And I got to tell you, I've not even come close to burning out ever in 35 years of doing this. Like, and I go hard. Henry can vouch for me. Like, these are long days every day. My kids are adults now. I hit the ground running. I'm out the door at 7 a.m. and I work all day, every day, 7 days a week doing this work, and I love it. It's in my DNA, and I've never come near burnout because every step I take is a prayer. Every micro interaction I have with another human being that produces positivity is a prayer. Supporting folks, supporting each other, doing the right thing, staying balanced, working hard, faith, just do it.
That's a beautiful way of being. It reminds me of that teaching, where, elders will say that life is ceremony, and it's beautiful to be able to work with a human being that just lives in that way.
I'm thinking of what Stan McKay, another important elder for you and for us, Mitch, in our last interview, I think I can't quote him exactly, but he said, faith is not something you defend, faith is something you live. And that's, wow, what a testament to that in your life, Mitch.
And Stan McKay is a perfect example of someone I emulate, someone I look up to, someone I love. I love Stan McKay, and he's had such a huge impact on my life.
How did the two of you connect? Where did the two of you connect?
Years ago, and it wasn't called Sandy
Right,
Soto.
it was called the Dr. Jesse Soto Resource Center.
Jesse Soto, that's right. So it was back in the 90s that I met Stan, and I actually met his dad before his dad passed away. So that's so cool to, be connected to his dad, right?
Cool. So you came out for some kind of event or something at the Jesse Soto Resource Center?
I don't know the circumstances because my memory's starting to go in my old age, but I just remember that's where I met Stan, and then he was also a board member at Urban Circle, and so we were associated through Urban Circle for many years. But he's the type of guy where you come around the corner and there he is, and you just light up.
It makes me curious about, this is kind of back to formative experiences. Like, where did you start to connect with Indigenous spirituality for yourself, Mitch?
I was, I want to say I was 25 years old. I was a single dad, and I was struggling. With life, and it was an elder who noticed that I was struggling. It was 1988, and Margaret Lavalee took me under her wing. Yeah. So Margaret.
Yeah. They have a long relationship with Sandy Soto, Margaret and Jules Lavalee. Yeah.
Right. And that was the doorway into that world. Margaret opened it, and then I just met a whole bunch of folks, from there, and it took off from there, and that was 33 years ago.
Yeah, that's like you got your start literally like I was only just like 1 year old. Oh, wow, that's awesome.
And you're you're Métis, right, Mitch? So you have that like ancestral connection to that tradition. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But didn't really grow up with it.
Were your parents like? What were there sort of secrets about it, or like how did your family hold its relationship to that tradition?
I think we lived it. So how I described my dad and my mom, and like my mom was a school teacher, and I can remember her spending hours in the evening phoning her different students and their parents and just providing support to them. I remember being in the kitchen doing my homework while my mom was on the phone calling her students in the evening.
Yeah.
Just to encourage them. Like I'm blessed. I'm just so blessed from my folks, right?
So they lived the community values. But I guess I'm asking also, like, was there some of that, like for a lot of Catholics and other Christian or Christianized kind of Indigenous people, there's a sense that they get from the church that some of their spiritual traditions are kind of like off limits somehow. Was there any of that kind of vibe in your family of origin?
Well, no. In the Métis community, there's quite an involvement with Christianity.
Right. Yeah.
A lot of Métis folks, grew up with, in the Catholic Church and as Christians and still are today. I think, yeah, like it was, it was never frowned upon, I don't know what else to say. Like we grew up in a Métis parish, never mind, of saying all the families in that parish are Métis.
But so then, did you see people praying with like smudge or the pipe or any of it?
No,
was any of that frowned upon, or that's kind of what I'm.
It didn't exist for me, and it didn't exist for us.
So it had just been kind of pushed.
I didn't know what smudge was until I was 25. Yeah.
So it was just stuff that your parents didn't have any contact with.
Right. It's not that we were rejecting it, or it just was never a concept. No. You didn't grow up with it.
Yeah, just like me, there's a lot of Indigenous families out there that because of oppression and colonization, we just don't grow up with it, and it's sad to say that I really didn't grasp that until I was in care. It was where my spiritual journey began, and it's actually a lot like that nowadays with a lot of youth out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is one of, Henry and I have talked about this before, it's one of the really sad ironies that kids, some kids have to get apprehended in order to make contact with their culture, and in some ways that was, because like Henry's family was not had lost its contact with
and some adults don't their generational memory doesn't get tweaked or touched until they go to prison. I work at Stony Mountain. And I can tell you about so many men who didn't grow up with it, and it took them going to prison. To meet an elder, to hear the drum for the first time, and when they did, they felt it, when you smell smudge for the first time, when you hear the drum the first time, when someone sings a song and you're there for the first time, it resonates into your generational memory. But for some folks, they didn't get that till they got to prison or were apprehended into care.
Yeah, crazy. Were there ancestral memories of your own parents that as you got involved in the spirituality and the culture that what was it like for them to witness you reconnecting?
I was really the only one in my family that pursued First Nations traditional spirituality, the sweat lodge, the Sundance. But everybody supports it. Everybody is so proud of me in my family, but no one else really picked it up. It wasn't something for my parents and nor for my siblings, but they sure love it and they sure support me, and so that's pretty
really
cool.
Good to hear.
Yeah, I didn't get any pushback from my own family, that's for sure.
Well, this has been an amazing conversation, Mitch. Henry and I were both really looking forward to having this time with you, and it has not disappointed. It's just been so rich and wide-ranging, and we're just grateful for you as a human being and for your work and your vision. and for the ways in which you've crossed paths and touched both our lives as a mentor. I think Henry can add his own. You've had a longer journey together with Henry. I think you and I we were just getting to know each other at Manitoba Adolescent Treatment Center. I remember I think I left there just before your dad died, and I remember writing you a card, a sympathy card, and I remember you coming into the office and we had a significant connection there. And I remember thinking, like, this is someone I could become friends with, was kind of the feeling I had. And
I remember that, Marcus. I was
Yeah.
02. That was 2002. I would go on to leave MATC a year later. I had spent 18 years working there, and I was called away after that.
yeah, our paths kind of parted around that same time, both with MATC and each other, and it's just lovely to reconnect. Henry, I don't know, what do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I really, really want to thank you. I know how busy you are, and your time is so valuable, so I really want to thank you for putting the time aside and doing this with us. You truly are like an inspiration, and I do tell people, like, the world needs more Mitches out there.
Thank you, Henry. And what I wanted to say is that it's an absolute honor to sit with two decolonized men. Men that put action to their faith and just work.
Mm-hmm.
And work is prayer.
Yes.
And supporting others is prayer. And I see both of you doing that. And I could not be more honored and feel more safe than to sit with you two. And as men, I got no problem saying I love you, Marcus. I love you, Henry. And I look forward to the time that we can see each other again out there.
Yes, for sure.
Without masks.
Yep.
You're right.
Henry's Lodge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That would be a good. That's a good idea, Marcus.
Well, love you too, Mitch.
Yes, I love you, Mitch.
Thanks for being awesome.
Thank you. Thank you, man.
Okay.
Okay, miigwech.
Good. Miigwech.